I'm Nina Sackler, and Donald, I'm co-chair of the Community and Environment Committee. Thank you.
And Donald, if you just want to move forward to the agenda, and then people can introduce themselves as they speak, since we don't have an orderly way of muting and unmuting people, that might be just a little more efficient.
Sure. Can we have HPD speak first? I believe they're first on the list.
I believe it's going to be EDC is going first. Am I right?
Okay, EDC then.
Yeah, I will introduce HPD as well. Hi, everyone. I'm getting a slight echo.
But before you begin, let me call some people out for not being on mute. Benjamin Grunkean, if you can mute yourself. Dawn Marie Walker and Deborah Valentin, and if you could mute yourselves. Karen Tavares, and I think that's it. Donald, you can stay unmuted because you're going to be jumping in.
What just happened? Okay.
Thank you.
And Julianne, you can go ahead, you're sharing your screen now.
Yeah, are you getting this file? This is my...
Yes, you can just put it on the slideshow and we can all see that.
We can see it.
Okay,
yes.
Perfect. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. This is my, but then my notes are missing. How do I do that then? Oh, sorry. This is my... Would you mind if I just increase the size? Because unfortunately, my notes were missing.
Julie, what do you need to do? No problem at all.
Okay.
I think you can use the same functions that you can use in PowerPoint. If you want to just take a minute, you can turn on the notes function and it should show up for you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My notes are on a separate page. And I asked my husband to print it out and he didn't yet. I'm sorry. I am airing it out. Why don't I just try like this for the time being, if that's okay? Just because, or else it's going to be tricky and I'm going to lose my notes. Okay, so first, let me just introduce myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Julianne Herskowitz. I work in the New York City at the New York City Economic Development Corporation in the Neighborhood Strategies Division. I'm a vice president there. I've actually been at the EDC for 9 years, but amazingly, this is my first time visiting your committee board, so I'm very excited to join you all today. And I should share, I'm a native Brooklynite. I actually grew up on the other side of the park in Park Slope. And I understand that this is a site that you have been advocating for its activation for a long time now, and are really excited to finally see something happen here. And I'm really pleased with HPD to be able to share some good news finally, and a path forward that I hope you all will agree with is the right way to go. So with that, let me start. The PS. Can you guys see this? Okay. Okay, great. Let me just try to, yeah. So the PS 90 site, as you know, it's located at the intersection of Church and Bedford Avenues. And despite this prominent corner, it has been vacant and underutilized for several years, actually since 2016, when the former building was demolished, unfortunately, due to unsafe conditions on the site. And I'm pleased to share with you what the current path forward for activating and revitalizing this historical site looks like today. But first, I wanted to start with some history. So the site has actually contained a school since the late 19th century. At that time, it was first a small wooden school house, which was known as Flatbush School Number 1. And later, as Flatbush's population grew, a larger, more modern school was erected and designed by John Collier. This was news to me recently. John Collier was a prominent civil engineer and landscape architect who also served as the chief engineer and superintendent of Prospect Park. So some interesting connections there. Back in the early 2000s, site work was being conducted by the School Construction Authority, and it was during that time that fragments of human remains and 18th and 19th century artifacts were discovered. We believe that the human remains are associated with an African slave burial ground that may have been located in the vicinity of the school dating back to the colonial era. Thank you, honey. Okay. Sorry, folks, doing it live. I'm going to go into the full screen now. Where was I? Right. So we believe that the human remains are actually associated with an African slave burial ground that may have been located in the vicinity of the school dating back to the colonial era. And at that time in the 2000s, when the human remains were found, they were actually interred at the nearby Reformed Dutch Church of Flatbush. And as required by the Landmarks Preservation Commission, because archaeological sensitivity was identified at the time, any further subsurface work was immediately halted and required to be stopped. And what was required at that time from a protocol and actual legal environmental review perspective was the preparation of two types of documents. So one is a community engagement plan and an unanticipated discoveries protocol. And despite the fact that that was required, not much actually happened on the site for several years until, as I mentioned, unfortunately in 2016, when the school ended up being demolished due to the fact that the landmark had severe deterioration and unsafe conditions on the site. And the site has really been fallow since then. And we really have to thank Councilmember Matthew Eugene, as well as your community board, for really being tireless advocates to see something happen on this site. So actually, it was back in just last year when Councilmember Eugene pushed EDC to advance preparation of these environmental review documents that are needed, including, again, the community engagement plan and the unanticipated discoveries protocol. And so EDC engaged Historical Perspectives, who is a local women business-owned enterprise. They're a consultant that is an archaeological and historian consultancy firm. And we engaged them to complete these documents and to work with us on sort of setting this path forward, on understanding more about the history of the site, whether in fact, our suspicions are true that this in fact is connected to a historical African burial ground, and starting to come up with a protocol for what we would do should, additional remains be uncovered, and coming up with an engagement plan that very clearly outlined the need to create a task force. So that's where we are today, to bring us to today. So it was just in October, actually, that the mayor and council member put out a press release and announced the path forward, moving forward with development of the site. And that includes an affordable housing site, which HPD will talk more about, including a youth-centered and vocational community space in the building as well. And then concurrent to that process, HPD's process, there will be a community-based task force, which will work in coordination with HPD and their eventual RFP to redevelop the site, to come up with recommendations that are focused on a number of things. So let me move it forward one sec. And that's inclusive of a number of different things. So first, aspects of the future development project. So the task force will, speak to and come up with recommendations around what the program of the housing site looks like, more detail about that community space that I mentioned, on and or off-site memorialization. And that can take so many different paths. Is that a plaque on the outside of the building? Is that an exhibit within the building that speaks to the history of the site? Is that located somewhere else, like at nearby institutions? So we'll be working in partnership with the Landmarks Preservation Commission to help inform what that looks like. And then lastly, it is finalizing this unanticipated discoveries protocol. So really identifying should additional artifacts and or human remains be identified through future development on the site. What is the appropriate handling of those artifacts and remains? Where should they be interred? Where should they be kept? What is the appropriate path forward to handle that? So This community task force has a lot to take on and to uncover, and EDC is working with HPD and, as I mentioned, LPC to advance this work over the next about 6 to 7 months. It's a pretty aggressive timeline, one in which, HPD can speak more about as well, but the council member was, I think, very purposeful and asked for expediency here, understanding that not much has happened on the site for several years now and wanted to see progress, certainly before he leaves office. So we're going to start with the task force and are launching it very soon, actually, next week. We have already sent out invitations. Community Board 14 is going to be sitting on the task force, and thank you in advance to Sean, who has agreed to sit on the task force and be your rep. And we look forward to working with you all and reporting back out on the process. HPD, again, will speak more to their timeline, but just wanted to share that the task force will run, starting in December through probably June of next year. And the task force itself will hold a public workshop as well as do an online community survey that will further feed into the RFP. So those recommendations that come out of this task force process will eventually go into the future housing development requests for proposals that HPD will be releasing. And their timeline, as you can see on the right, shows that they're most likely going to be released the request for qualifications at the end of this year, followed by request for proposals in mid-2021, which they can speak more to. And then one additional slide, this is my last slide. I just want to note a couple more things about the task force. So it is going to be co-chaired by Borough President Eric Adams and then Councilmember Matthew Eugene, who each have expressed strong interest in seeing activation of the site. We've sent out invitations. This includes to a number of local community-based organizations, some who are more development focused and housing focused, and others who are more historical and can advise on how we actually do the descendant outreach and plan for memorialization on the site, as well as other community stakeholders. And I spoke to the timeline, and I'm happy to answer any more questions. We're really excited to advance this important project during this time, all virtually, I should share. For the current plan, we will be holding all these meetings virtually, but look forward to doing it, in a really comprehensive way during this time. And we'll be working with a facilitation firm, a local MWB firm, to help us facilitate these conversations with the task force, alongside historical perspectives, the archaeological firm who is continuing to work with us on doing descendant outreach and preparing this important unanticipated discoveries protocol document. So that's all I have. I'm happy to turn it over to Paris and Michael, or we can pause for questions as well, but it might make more sense to actually turn it over to HPD to complete the presentation first.
Yeah, let's hear from HPD, that we can answer. That you can answer all the questions after that.
Great. I'm hoping to stop sharing now.
Great.
And I will put myself on mute.
And who is the next presenter, please?
Catherine Taveras.
1 moment, I'll make you the presenter. Okay, you should be able to share screen.
Okay, just got it. 1 second. In true 2020 fashion here, I'm having some technical difficulties with the presentation. Just bear with me for one more moment. I may need you to share your screen because this is not working on my end.
Okay, let me see what I can do. I think I have the presentation set.
And then Catherine, you will still be able to speak, but I believe, one moment.
You can actually share that with Paris Strotter since he's the one who will be speaking for this portion of it. And if you can transfer screen sharing to Michael Sandler.
Okay, great. Michael Sandler should have the screen sharing, and Paris Strotter, you are unmuted, so you should be able to speak anytime.
Paris, you can go ahead.
Paris, you're unmuted. If you're not able to speak, try the *6 option, but I've unmuted you on my end.
So I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Michael Sandler, Director of Neighborhood Planning at HPD. It's great to be here today. Can you see it? Can you see my slide here?
We can
Yes.
see you and we can see your slide, yes.
Donald, I'm not sure if Paris has speaking capabilities at this point.
But Mr. Sandler does. I can hear him fine.
That's true. We were hoping that Paris would do this presentation. I'm not even seeing Paris on the participants list, actually. Is he still here?
He is here. He's just under the attendees list. He's at the very bottom. If you scroll down, you will see.
Well, let me text him, and if he can't get on, I can just do these slides. I'll go ahead and go. So, as I said, my name is Michael Sandler. Hopefully, Paris will join us for the Q&A, and he can. Paris says he doesn't know how to unmute. Is it possible to just go ahead and unmute him?
I have already unmuted him. I don't know if there's an audio problem on his end. He is unmuted on our end, so he should be able to speak if he has a speaker hooked up. He just needs to make sure he has a speaking device.
Got it.
It looks like he might just have headphones.
All right, well, I'll go ahead. Sorry about this, as Catherine said, very 2020 problem. So just quickly, what is affordable housing? So at HPD, we're the Department of Housing Preservation and Development. Hopefully folks are familiar with us. We finance the development of affordable housing around the city, including on sites that are publicly owned land. Sites that are public land go through a process that we call a request for proposals, where we solicit and evaluate proposals for development of those sites. There's obviously a lot of conversation about what is affordable and affordable for whom. So just quickly, I thought I would clarify. HPD, when we think about affordable housing, housing is considered affordable when a household spends no more than 1/3 of its rent. No more than 1/3 of its income on rent and utilities. So this changes, obviously, what is affordable changes depending on someone's income. So for a household whose gross income is around $20,000, a monthly rent of approximately $600 is affordable for that household, versus a household that earns $100,000 a year, a monthly rent of around $2,500 is affordable for that household. You may have heard of a concept called AMI, or the Area Median Income. The area median income is determined each year by the federal government for different regions. It factors in not just New York City, but the entire region. And actually for New York City, because of our high housing costs, our area median income has been adjusted to account for that. So for the year 2020, and for a family of 3, the area median income is around $100,000. This is not what we create affordable housing for. This number is a reference that allows us to compare affordability from year to year as you have inflation and as incomes in the city change. So HPD uses this number as a reference point and sets our own income requirements that are tailored to the needs of New Yorkers. So we create affordable housing that is affordable to those that earn, say, 30% of the area median income, or $30,000 a year, or 40% of the area median income, 50%, 60%. So for a 60% area median income household, that's a household that earns around $60,000 a year, and that might be a taxi driver and a janitor, and their child might earn that salary. So this slide shows how this all plays in, how sort of family size, percent of area median income relates to the rent that someone might pay in affordable housing. So here you see a variety of different conceptions of households, from an individual senior who earns Social Security, who would pay 30% of their income in HPD funded housing, to another individual earning 30% of the area median income whose rent might be around $400 a month. I'll point you out the column with the 2-bedroom, where you've got 2 different size families, and also in different income groups, and they have different rents for that same 2-bedroom apartment that's based on their need and their ability to pay. And I'll talk now quickly about our process, if I can figure out how to go to the next slide. We seem to be missing this slide. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. All right, do I have a slide showing now?
Nope. No. There it goes.
All right. Catherine, would you like to go through this one, or would you like me to do this part as well?
Yeah, I can talk about this. Can people hear me okay?
Yep,
We can hear you.
great.
Yes.
Great. Thanks, Michael. So as Michael mentioned, the development of city-owned land is conducted through our competitive review process, which is known as a request for proposal. We start off with community engagement. And I would just caveat this to say that even though it's showing up at the beginning of this process, we conduct community engagement throughout the different phases of the RFP. With that community engagement, we are able to collect feedback from the community and draft the community visioning report, synthesizing what we heard, and attach that to the request for proposal. And once we issue that, it is with criteria and goals, shared goals, for developers to respond to. We then receive the proposals and start a competitive review process. Excuse me. And then that allows us to designate a developer. There we come back to the community for more feedback, and prepare for pre-development, which includes environmental reviews and land use approvals, such as the public review process of ULURP. And usually a 2 to 3 year process, then leading up to the start of construction. I'll pause there for questions and also invite you, Director of the
Well, let's
pre-development.
hold all the questions till the very end.
That's it, actually.
All right, let's have questions then.
Does HPD, sorry to chime in here, but does HPD just want to clarify the process for this procurement that's slightly different with the RFQ leading to the RFP?
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to let everyone know that Paris Strotter should be on the line.
Paris, you here?
Okay. Julianne, if you want to ask your question again, but Donald, I just wanted to mention that I do see questions from Barden Prasant and Sean Campbell.
Great.
I just thought it might be helpful if my HPD colleagues just reiterated how the procurement process will look as a two-step process now for this procurement and site.
Hi, yes, this is Catherine again. I will start my video. So Julianne, as you mentioned in your presentation, we have the RFQ being issued before the end of this year, which will lead us to qualified applicants who will then be eligible to apply for the RFP, which will be released mid next year. And I believe Paris now looks like he may have sound in case he wants to add anything to that. Unless
Oh no, that's fine. I apologize so much. I was on my computer and my computer evidently is not compatible with this software. I've never used the software before, so I'm on my phone and I figured out how to get in, and evidently you guys can hear me now. So I really apologize for that. I thought I had used WebEx before, but maybe I guess it's just as an attendee. Again, apologies.
Well, you're here now and welcome. Glad you joined us. Thank you.
Sean, you had a question?
I do. I want to start out with just some information that EDC and HPD may already know. I'm going to say something I plan to say at every single meeting. And just to be clear, Ed Powell has asked me that I'll be working closely with all of the co-chairs of the relevant committees, which I think are all of our committees. But, Community Board 14 has the highest percentage of residents who live more than a quarter of a mile away from a park, which is to say we are the park poorest community district of all 59 community districts in New York City. And certainly there's a need for affordable housing in our district. We have approximately a 20% poverty rate. We are talking about what is affordable. We rank something like house out of 59 community boards, we rank 14th in terms of the number of households in our districts that are severely rent overburdened. That means they're paying more than 50% of their household income. We also have something like 12th in our overcrowding rate and our rental, and we rank 34th in our rental vacancy rate. So the housing is indeed needed, but the lack of parkland, the fact that we rank 15th in terms of density, and yet almost 50% of our land is 1 and 2 family homes, which is to say the dense parts of our district are really, really dense. And this is going into one of them. We also have overcrowded schools. And so we also in this community board, there was a handful of DOB issued permits for new housing in 2010. I think there was like single digits, and that has skyrocketed to, there were 9 in 2010 and there were 668 in 2019. So this is a community that feels like there's a lot of building going on. So that's just the backdrop I just want to ensure is considered as this project moves forward. And especially as it's moving forward in proximity to Caton Flats, which was our other 100% affordable housing development that we're extremely excited about, but we make sure that the AMIs offered complement and pick up slack where Caton Flats may have left some. So that's all. I mean, there's sort of questions inside of those statements, but I just wanted to provide that additional context.
The next hand I see is Edward Sen.
A question for Julianne. I just wanted to know a little bit more about this task force as far as the selection process and how this task force is, who decides to appoint the members, how many seats there are, and just for more transparency about who gets selected and so on and so forth.
Certainly. Appreciate the question. I want to just acknowledge beforehand too, Sean, thank you for all that important information about the state of your district and how this site fits into it. So in terms of the task force, we worked with the council member and the borough president as co-chairs to first identify key stakeholders that should be invited to join the task force. And it was through that process that we got the list that I believe, I'm going to get it wrong because I'm not remembering off the top of my head. I want to say there are about 12 different stakeholder organizations that were invited. And what we were doing by putting together the group was really trying to identify folks who could, well, first of all, the community board 14, but then of course community board 17, since the site actually is just located across the street from community board 17. So we thought it appropriate to invite them as well. The electeds, of course, beyond just even the co-chairs of the BP and council member. But then really tried to identify community-based organizations who were knowledgeable in the subject matter. So this includes, you know, organizations that are focused on providing housing and what housing looks like, you know, in the neighborhood of Flatbush, but then also organizations that have maybe a broader geographic scope, like the Brooklyn Historical Society, but are subject matter and content experts as it relates to the history of Brooklyn. So it's a bit of a motley crew. And we just sent out invitations and are, you know, in the process of solidifying that list. And are hopeful to, you know, we don't want to be completely prescriptive with the task force before it launches. You know, you need to let a community engagement process play out. But our hope is that through that community engagement process, that there will be additional opportunities beyond the public workshop and the community survey to engage with the broader community. One idea that I've had, and we'll see if the task force picks it up, is can we, you know, release meeting minutes through the community board potentially. I'm not sure if there's a place to post that on your website, but that's an idea. So trying to identify ways in which we can, you know, share information about the goings on of the task force as we progress, in addition to the public workshop and the community online survey that we'll be doing as well. So thank you.
Next question from anybody?
Carl Henry Cesar, followed by possibly Barden Puissant. So it's a check mark instead of a hand, so I'm not sure. Henry Cesar.
Yep. Hi, folks. Good evening. So to HPD and EDC, thank you, folks, for attending the meeting and sharing this information with us. I have a few questions. The first question I have, Julianne, I believe it was your presentation. Could you put up the slide that showed very high level the timeline for the task force and the co-chairs briefly? if it's possible for you to share your screen and do that.
Julian, if that's onerous, you can also email it to us after the presentation, and we'll make it available on our website, and especially email it to you, Carl.
Cool. So then in that case, then I'll just ask the questions and let me see if my memory is on point. So I believe the first thing the slide said the co-chairs are Borough President Eric Adam and Matthew Eugene. So the first procedural question I have is, if one or both co-chairs are not present, can the meeting take place or not? The second question I have is, I believe it said the timeline was December 2020 through June. And so has the date for each of those months in between been set? And then the third procedural question I have is, it said, I believe one of those meetings was going to be public and then some sort of survey would be done. So my question is, what does the definition of that meeting being public mean? And then does this mean that the remaining meetings are private? And if so, what is the definition of private?
Sure. First of all, kudos to you. You got all those details correct from the presentation slides, so great memory. To your first question about the co-chairs, it's my anticipation that there will be identified proxies for the council member and the borough president. For example, Committee Board 14 received their invite from Ryan Lynch, who's Chief of Staff for the borough president's office. They're both very busy people. And so I imagine we will have a proxy, not only for them, but for each organization, should the designated lead representative not be able to join for every meeting. Although, of course, and Sean, you should know this, for continuity's sake, it's great to have the same person at every single task force meeting. Your second question was about the timing. So the first meeting is set for next Wednesday, December 9th. We'll be sending invites out shortly with, the exact date and time. But the rest of the meetings are not set. Right now, we were anticipating about a meeting a month. But, it's really hard to kind of forecast and predict how a process like this is going to happen. So no further meetings are set, although we are expecting about a monthly cadence. And then I actually think if it's okay, I would turn the public workshop question over to HPD, since that actually is something that very much fits into the HPD procurement process and would be a great thing for them to speak to.
Yeah, sure. So we do for all of our RFPs a workshop where we ask the public for priorities about the project. Different sites are different, so those workshops are not exactly the same. But in this case, we anticipate we'd be asking folks about the desired affordability that they'd like to see for the project in terms of what households this particular project would serve. We usually talk about the ground floor space in the building and what kind of uses make sense in terms of both commercial uses and community facility uses based on the needs in the neighborhood. And we talk of course about the design of the building and then the amenities that the building can have, like open space within the project. So that's what the workshop would be. And to the question about how public it is, it's entirely public, and we do our best to kind of get the word out and partner with organizations to help us get the word out. And we look forward to partnering with the community board here to do that. But that meeting would be completely public.
All right. Thank you, folks, for answering my questions.
Next person.
Barton Prasant, do you have your hand up?
Oh,
Yes.
incredible. I don't know, I had to duck out for a second. I don't know if anybody else had said it, but I have to say, to find EDC as a driving force behind 130 affordable units is not what I knew them for a decade ago. And I can't tell you how thrilled I am to hear that plus a community center is what you're promoting for the neighborhood, especially considering the history of this particular site. So I think it's hugely creditworthy, and just want to throw my total support behind it. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you.
We appreciate your comment and glad that we're changing your opinion about EDC. and what we're doing as an organization, but this is really a joint effort. HPD is obviously leading the housing development, and we'll be working with Landmarks Preservation Commission as well. But again, I said at the onset, but just wanted to say kudos to the community board, who really has been a tireless advocate to see activation of this site. And hopefully it's turning a corner and there's a bright future ahead.
Oh, who is next?
Billy Richling has the next question.
Oh, great.
Hi, yeah, thank you for the presentation. My question is a quick one, which is just, is there any sort of zoning restriction on the site currently that would require being changed by any sort of development? And would that require a ULURP, or is that not something you're anticipating happening?
It's really early in the process to talk about zoning, but my understanding of the site is that the housing development there is feasible under the current zoning. We need to look at it further, and we are. But the public input process, which is both in this case the task force process and the public meeting that we'll have, will inform that, because we don't know what kind of housing development we're trying to do here. So it's therefore it doesn't make sense to do any modeling yet. So based on what we hear from the workshops about both what kind of housing and what the design should be, then we'll back into a zoning strategy, assuming the zoning should be changed at all, which it might not need to be at all.
Got it. Thank you.
Sean Campbell, next question.
Hi, this one really is a question. If is going to be part of the conversation, that's great, obviously, because that is a soft order. But does that mean that there's going to be a CB 17 preference? Is the HPD rule that 50% of the first lottery will be reserved for CB 14 residents, or does that lottery, or do we share that lottery stat with 17? I'm just trying not to share.
There has been sharing in the past, but that's only special circumstances. Again, this is something that we would look to the community process and to the electeds. If there is a reason to do sharing here because of the proximity, then we have done that before, but it's not something that we would propose initially. That would be something that would have to come from we'd have to hear that from the community, and the electeds would have to support that.
Okay, understood. Thank you. And then a follow-up to that, which is also based on a statistic that we sadly can't boast in this district, which is the serious housing code violations. We rank about 6th in the city for those. It's something like 180 per 1,000 units of housing. And so would HPD be able to, the idea of bringing new housing into this community is, it's obviously necessary, but why are we bringing in new housing if we're not working for the housing that's already here? So I would love to hear more from HPD. It doesn't have to be here and now, but we'd just love to hear more about the commitment to preserve the affordable housing that exists while we gain additional units. Is that something that we could work on and that this project could help us highlight?
Sure, yeah, and we can come back. My colleagues work on the code enforcement side. That's not us here. As it relates to preservation, also my colleagues, not me, can speak to those efforts. Generally with HPD and the Housing New York plan, we're doing 60% of, actually it's more than 60%, but the target goal is that 60% of the housing we're financing is preservation versus 40% new construction. So we definitely do more on the preservation side, but we can come with a report on what we're doing in this neighborhood and whether there's chances to elevate those efforts. Certainly since we're focused on this project.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Yes, next question is Glenn Woolen.
Hello, I have a couple of questions. One is, do you know the current zoning designation of the site? And as I recall, there was going to be 132 affordable housing units, I believe. I'm wondering if you have any idea of the percentage of those that are going to dip down into the 30 and 40% of AMI type. That's it.
Oh, just on the second question quickly, that's what we'll do the workshop about. And of course, we'll come up in the task force process too. What is the desired affordability? Because we have different programs that we can do based on what kind of households we're trying to serve and what kind of incomes we're trying to serve. So that's not determined yet. And we would look to the community to really express preferences about that. On the zoning, I'm going to kick it to either Julianne or to Catherine, because I don't remember what the zoning district was here.
I embarrassingly don't remember either. You remember, Catherine? If not, we can easily get back to you guys.
That's okay. Thank you very much. I'll look it up.
Sorry to not be more help.
Any more people?
Yes, Greg Alvarez is next.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, great. Yeah, I just wanted to answer the zoning question. Let's see. I was just looking it up. It looks like it's C4 4A, which would apply the R7A standard. So it looks like the density could be pretty high here, but I'd have to do a little bit more investigation to see what exactly is allowed. The one question I had was just looking at the site. There looks to be an additional property on the Church Avenue frontage that I guess currently is used for like parking or some other storage purposes. Is that going to be part of this lot as well, or is that separate and apart?
First of all, thank you for looking it up and happy to compare notes later on the zoning and FAR. So that's actually privately owned, so not part of the city lot jurisdiction. It's unfortunate because it's prime real estate on Church Avenue. That being said, you never know, maybe that is an interested party and developer who would want to respond to future procurement that HPD releases. We shall see, but our actual boundary does not include that existing small parking lot on Church Avenue.
And there's no intention of acquiring it at this point?
No, there's not.
Thank you.
Sure.
Nina Sabgir.
Yeah. So I guess I'm sort of piggybacking a little bit onto some of the things that Sean brought up, but just I go through that neighborhood actually regularly on my way to work, and it's a very high density neighborhood as is. And I'm wondering if has there been any outreach, for instance, to the school that's right next door about their ability to absorb more students potentially, and also looking into maybe an additional project, maybe get rid of some of the gas station, auto body places or something, to open up some green space. I mean, this desire to keep building. I think there's a point where that has a very negative impact on the human beings that are kind of all stacked up on top of each other. We've seen this in projects where people are basically kind of stacked on top of each other with no open space and no green space. So I'm just, I guess, expressing some concern that these are things that that need to be looked into.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that. No, we certainly hear that and share some of those concerns. I think in terms of the school capacity question is what maybe you were getting at. Certainly as a stakeholder, we would outreach to the adjacent school to be part of the process, the community process. But in terms of capacity of that school and school seats, there's a process through the city's environmental quality review procedure that this project would have to file a report, an environmental site assessment that would look into basically whether this whether the number of units that we're proposing has any burden on the school system. So that's certainly part of the process. That process also, as many of you guys know, looks at a variety of factors as well, including open space that you mentioned. And we're hearing already open space is a theme, so I understand that. I'm assuming that will come up. There are ways that we can incorporate, modest amounts of open space in our projects. So I have a feeling that that'll be something that will become a priority in the community process, and we should be able to do something related to that.
The next question I see is from Anne Godet. And for anyone calling in on the phone or who doesn't have a hand-raise function, you're welcome to also just unmute and speak if I'm unable to call on you. Next is Anne Godet.
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you and see you, yes.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's very informative. I have two sort of piggyback questions. One of them, I think they both actually roll off of what Sean brought up earlier. I wasn't clear on the answer to the soft border issue whereby input from Community Board 17 is welcomed and included without the expectation that having a seat at the table then gives them more of a preferential. So if there's an overflow, which is hard to imagine, would their constituents or their members be more apt to be included in this as potential tenants? And then further, going to these back to the green space and community use. Is it likely that the open space or park would be both private, a section of it would be private to the project and part of it would be open to the community for use? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So just the second one first, we've in a number of our projects, we've seen various types of open spaces, and oftentimes there is both private open spaces for that are exclusively for the building residents, and then open spaces that are open to the public in some way. So both options are possible. Potentially, that we have to go through that process, hear what the priorities are from the community, and then figure out how we fit that on the site. But both are possible, yes. To the first question, so I think you're talking about like the 50% community preference in our lottery system. So if you are, okay, I see you nodding. Good. So yeah, I mean, typically the way that process works is where the project is located within that community district, there's a 50% preference to that lottery. So basically, we make sure that that 50% of the units are filled with applicants from that district, which is always happens just because there's so many applications. There's such need across the city. And then the other 50% of the units are open to anyone who applies. So that would be the expectation with this project as well, unless through the community process and the councilman expresses a strong desire to split that community preference between the two districts given the proximity. That has happened before, but that that's not something that HPD would propose. That would be something that would come out of the process. And and the way that I guess the other part of your question is just the involvement of Community Board 17. I think we're just trying to involve the neighborhood, and because the site sits on the border, the neighborhood does mean that it's part of the Community Board 17 as well. So of course we're going to include them in the process. Both, I think they have a rep on the task force, as well as we would make sure that we're outreaching, that we outreach to groups and to adjacent civics that are adjacent to the site.
Oh, thank you. Next question.
I believe the Their hands in the air are raised for prior questions, but Glenn Woolen, Barden, Prasant, if either of you or if anyone else has a question, please speak now.
I have a
forever
question.
hold your tongue.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ilana Reinholz has her hand in the air. 1 moment, please.
Yeah, I can go. I'm just going to talk then. Hey, everyone. Thanks. Yeah, so just to piggyback on and to really reiterate, we don't have enough green space, open space. As you know, it's really important. I'm going to add on another layer, which is I wonder if this is a question for, I think, HPD, if you've thought about the overlapping need with food insecurity. If you're on Church or Flatbush in the last 4 days, you will have seen in the last few weeks and months all the churches and food pantries that are overwhelming. And I really mention this as just a note that we're just, pouring water into a leaky bucket. And so what we're doing is we're not really taking care of the food insecurity issues. And I think this is a really unique opportunity that if it's important to other people in the community as well, has there ever been something done where you've gotten support and a partnership with a food pantry in order to build an innovative model where we can have part of this green space reserved for community gardening, or if there's a plan to consider a green roof?
Yeah, great questions. And thanks for bringing that point about food insecurity in the neighborhood. We're in our learning stage for the project, so we're trying to learn the community needs. What are the real needs that we see out there as people tell us them. So to the extent that food insecurity becomes a real priority that the community has for this particular project, yeah, there's ways that we've partnered on other projects throughout the city, either with community gardens or with community groups that partner with organizations to bring fresh foods through a facility. I'm not aware of a specific partnership with the food pantry yet, but there are partnerships like that where basically there's a strong need for fresh foods in that area, and through some kind of restaurant or convenience store, there's a particular focus on fresh foods. And there's been a couple of projects that we've done like that. So we're open to that. This particular site does have space on the ground floor for a variety of uses. So there's ample opportunity to do something if that's again articulated by the community process as a priority.
Oh, thank you.
Donald, I don't see any other hands at this time.
Well, fine. Then let's move on to the next group of people that are making a presentation. And it was great hearing about this. I mean, hopefully they'll be back in touch with us over the next year, 6 months, and giving us follow-ups. Correct?
Definitely. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank
you for coming. It was great.
Take care. Nice to meet you all.
Please share any materials with the community board if you'd like us to share.
Will do. Thanks.
No, people are leaving left and right.
Okay, Sean, I believe you can go ahead about the 5D presentation.
Yes, let's go on to the next presentation.
Oh, that's right. That is on me. I'm sorry. I want to point out that do it. And I want to point that out because they asked for community board input on their 5G plan over the summer. And hopefully Barden and Greg Alvarez are still with us because we let them know that the community board, that normally this type of plan would be brought before a committee, and over the summer the committee wasn't meeting, and we did send it out to board members. Their public hearing was distributed to board members. I know a couple of you, Glenn Woolen, I think also attended, but because of our bylaws, those board members couldn't represent the community board, but they did bring back information. We shared some information and what they learned, but it went straight to the City Planning Commission. And the City Planning Commission noted that DoIT had not really engaged at the community level with this plan. And so there was a commitment from DoIT to do so. So we invited them to a committee meeting. It was sort of working backward, but better than not working at all. But they then sent us a sort of questionnaire so that we could sign off and sort of attest to the fact that they had done the community outreach. So all I did in response to that was provide the letter that I had provided to City Planning Commission in the first place, saying that they really hadn't engaged with the community board in a timeline that, is a chartered mandated timeline. It wasn't just us, not wanting to talk over the summer, because as you recall, we actually did have some committee of the whole meetings. So I just wanted to let the board know that we're on record with a sort of dissatisfaction with their engagement. And then the fact that they're still not here tonight, I think just is poor on their part. But it doesn't necessarily reflect on the plan. I think we've had the plan up. I think we just distributed it to the board, but we can put it on the website. I can get it. The one thing that was really impactful in this district, or of concern in this district, was there was a plan to put the 5G infrastructure on top of light poles, and that included light poles in our landmarked districts. And there was an expression of concern about that, and that was brought to their attention. And so they're not going to do that. So that was at least some input that they did take. And actually, it wasn't even DoIT that took the input. It was the city design commission didn't let them, wouldn't approve it with that. So I don't know if Gregory or Barden or Glenn may have gone to start the birthday festivities that are taking place in his home. I just wanted on public record with this committee that we tried to get DoIT. DoIT did not participate, so I wanted it said in this arena. Barden, do you want to? Can you add to that, or Gregory?
I am here.
Go ahead. I'll defer to Gregory.
Oh yeah, I think Sean, you've sort of set forth what the issues are. I mean, there really isn't a particularly good plan in place in terms of community input whenever the decisions are made in terms of location of these poles. The FCC over the last decade or so have sort of removed a lot of the jurisdiction for localities, but to some extent we still do have some role, and I think DoIT in some respects is trying to navigate around that without having to get entangled with community input. And so that, I think, was the most disappointing thing, that we're hearing from them at this point. And I don't know, is there any other avenue at this point to keep pushing the issue?
If I might make a comment, Sean?
Go ahead.
All right. The thing about 5G, unless they've improved the technology, is that it's pretty much line of sight without a lot of deviation. It doesn't penetrate well into buildings and so forth. So if we tell them that they cannot install these cylindrical towers in our neighborhoods, that means that we are eliminating 5G from the neighborhoods. So I'm not trying to make a comment pro or con, just more of a factual, be aware that there's a consequence to this. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Glenn, and I wasn't making a pro or con comment. It's more of a process commentary.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I mean, I think that 5G is being deployed as we speak on existing facilities. Just to give you an idea of what's going on in that regard, the BSA is taking a bigger role in looking at those sorts of installations when carriers do come in, and that's sort of a recent occurrence. The difference here, I think, is with the poles themselves. I agree that there is some concern about connectivity, and we want to be aware of that as well. But I think for us, it was more a process, just to kind of understand how those decisions are being made, and it seemed like the community boards were being, you know, pushed aside a bit, I think, you know, in that regard.
Since you'd asked, you know, for a little bit of input from me, I mean, FiOS became something of a debacle, is my recollection. And so as far as engagement and standing by their commitments, that it certainly hasn't boded well for other tech massive projects. I mean, of course, you know, as you know, Sean, my particular bailiwick is Prospect Park South, and the concept, you know, once I saw the actual visual of what one of those would look like on top of one of the Flatbush, you know, Bishop's Crook poles, it was a bit of a shock to my board. So granted, there is supposedly only one in our entire district. It's actually only a block off of Church. And if at some point they ever do seem to be more receptive to input from neighborhoods, it would be great if they could possibly move that up to Church Ave rather than plugging it down right on Albemarle, which, you know, has been sort of a haven for, you know, pastoral respite over the course of COVID. So there's my speech.
Barton, I'm not sure if I understood that. There's when you say that plan, you mean one installation. You don't mean that there was one that was planned for a Bishop Crook light pole, do you?
Yeah, it was the one right across from the mosque.
Okay, because I think those got pulled out of the plan, that they weren't going to put them.
Oh, right. You definitely had implied that they ultimately were going to back down on that, but
yeah. And
on top of the fact that it would be, you know, put right outside of the mosque's front door, seemed a little insensitive.
Right. Okay, so we'll go back to getting the plan up. I know. So I just saw a link pop up in the chat. If anybody wants to take a look at that, Anya is always quick on her feet with the link, so that's there. So I mean, I don't think there's anything stopping us from continuing to have share input on the particulars of the plan. And I'll let and then where to take this is just to continue to take it to the elected officials, and we'll report out at our board meeting next week that this was noted in committee, that their outreach was poor at best.
But again, kudos to you, Sean, for being dogged on this and being in their face. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll tell them I get thanked for that.
There you go. All right, I'm out of here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Donald and Nina, for the indulgence on that item. I appreciate it.
Sure. Is there any new business? Any other business for the board tonight?
I actually wanted to just talk a little bit about something which is ongoing, and I'm hoping that at some point, I guess we'll have to figure out how to get them in. But there, some of you may be familiar with the Brooklyn Greenway project, and this is right now the studies that are being done, the work being done to figure out how to put it all together is coming from a grant from the Helmsley Charitable Trust to New York Parks. The idea is to create protected bike lanes, primarily protected, that will link different communities and different parks throughout Brooklyn, which, given that we don't have any parks other than Prospect Park, kind of leaves us out of the picture to some extent. But the work that they're trying to do is to close the gaps, to make it so that it's more accessible for different communities to get to green spaces and to different parks. So that's just kind of it in a nutshell. I don't know how to put the screenshot that I have onto anything that it can look at. But there is a site that you can go to, destination greenways my social. And if you just look at the Brooklyn Greenways Initiative, you can find actually an interactive map. So I just wanted to bring it up that it is something that I'm involved with, I guess, and I am looking into bringing in people to come and talk to us on a more formal level at some point in the future.
Great. Sean, can we put a link to that group on the website?
I can I can send you what I have.
Can you put it in the chat right now, Nina? Put it in the chat.
I don't know how to do that. You're asking.
Okay, email it. Email it. If you could email it to us, we'll get it up.
I'll email that as well as the list of the, I guess, sort of the main contacts or people that are involved, because I have that list also.
Email us everything. If you want the link in the chat right away, we can do that. Otherwise, we can get it out in a follow-up. But certainly, your next committee meeting, if you would like this to be an item and you can identify people or want us to, or put us in contact with people who would come and present, for sure. I'll also take the opportunity to remind you that we had a planning fellow who did some work on, greening the district. And I'll take another look in there and see if ODED included any of that greenways in his report. I don't recall specifically, but I think it ties into that really nicely. So let's keep that document alive and follow up with a presentation at your next committee meeting.
Okay.
Great.
I did try to send something, but I have a feeling it didn't happen.
Okay, we'll do it in a follow-up then, Nina.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Donald, I see two more hands, Carl Henry Cesar and Nikki Levinson Angulo.
Thanks again, Anya. So, Sean, just a clarifying question. I think you may have answered this already, but I forget. So with DoIT requesting feedback for CB14's take on the 5G plan, is this something where they truly want feedback, or is this the illusion of choice? You're on mute, Sean, so I can't hear you.
My screen to look for a different link. I just took a lot of words to say I wasn't going to answer that, because I don't want to give them a compliment if they don't deserve it, but I don't want to be cynical unnecessarily. So I don't know. Shrug.
So to be continued. All right, thank you.
Nicole Levinson Angulo.
Hi. First of all, thank you to Donald and Nina and to Sean and Anya for running the committee meeting. I have a very general question, which I will always be bringing the general process questions to these meetings, which is, how do the agendas for this committee meeting get put together, and what sort of looks like it would be on the agenda for the next meeting? How are the agendas formed? And my other question is, occasionally I have people or neighbors sort of ask me a question that pertains to the work of this committee. So Sean and Donald, for instance, Marion Yuen, who helps run the Newkirk Community Garden, which Donald also is a founding member of, and which I'm a volunteer of, asked a question about something. And what do we do with those questions? I'm sorry for asking such a sort of naive, basic thing, but I don't have any idea how either of those two things happen.
Well, to answer part of it, a lot of things get on the agenda because we're required to hold hearings on things, like with the phones or with the development. The other things are people will approach us and say, can we come to the meeting and talk about something? And 9 times out of 10, we will say yes, if it's appropriate for our committee. Like I know Marion had to leave it, unfortunately, because she wanted to speak about the garden. And I'd like to give her the opportunity to have a slot at the next meeting to actually talk about the garden. But if anybody comes up with anything that they want to talk about, approach me or my co-chair or Sean, and if it's appropriate, we will try and get it on the agenda.
Donald and Nina, are there, obviously there are topics like the 5G topic where you would proactively, or Sean, thank you, Sean, for again being on top of that, where you would be proactively trying to get a meeting, but are there sort of standing relationships or expectations of city agencies about the rate at which they'll present to us? For instance, how did the PS 190, I'm sorry, I can't remember if it's 190 or 90, how did that come to be on the agenda tonight?
Well, because that's a site that's been under strict needs statements for many years. Once I saw the press release that it was going to be developed by HPD and EDC, we reached out to them. I think we got the press release in in October anyway. And so we wanted them as quickly as possible. So that was a proactive agenda item. However, if we had waited like another 5 minutes, they probably would have sent, Ricky DeCosta probably would have sent us an email saying, when can we present to your board? We also do things a little bit differently than other boards. Like we bring a lot more through committee. So other boards will have these presentations at their full board meetings. And so the expectation for different agencies or organizations to present in terms of frequency, it varies by committee, and each committee has developed its own culture a little bit over the years. So you might notice that the Public Safety Committee has the commanding officer of the police precinct at least once a year and sometimes twice a year. The Education, Libraries, and Cultural Affairs Committee, we've over the years, we've had School Construction Authority come once a year to give us an update on capital projects. So there's little things, I can't think of any more off the head. There's some things that are kind of de rigueur, and then there's other things that are kind of out of the blue, and then there's other things that just fall into place because, like Donald said, we're approached by DOT as a perfect example. I mean, don't get me started. They do it less often than they used to, but they used to come to us and say, hey, we have a bike lane proposal, we have a bus lane proposal, we have a street a directional proposal. And so if there was anything big in the roadway, they would come to us and ask us to hear it because they had an obligation to seek community input on it. Does that help? As far as other people asking for things, if it's a topic, we'll discuss it with the co-chairs and see if we can get a speaker to the topic. And in the case of the community garden, we love that they have come to us before, and we'd love an update from them. But sometimes I find that people ask questions and they want it to bring it up in a committee when it's really just a service delivery request. So they want to talk about, and this one came up recently, what is being perceived as a community garden upgrade at the dead ends on Avenue H near the Avenue H subway station. That's actually just a staging area for MTA. To do the accessibility ramp there. So always just refer people to us or relay a question.
We also try to meet with parks and sanitation at least once a year for updates of what's going on in our district.
And Nikki, take a look at the bylaws, and you'll see under each committee is a list of agencies that committee is supposed to have some, purview over or contact with, and then we go from there. That's sort of the baseline.
Right, and that I did make sure to look up and to keep straight who's supposed to have which relationship with who. I just know that a lot of thought must go into creating these agendas and having these invitations set up, and I was interested in how that actually happens and what inputs go into it and what's proactive versus are reactive in the good way, not in the bad way.
Yeah, well, and this will come as no surprise to anybody, but Anya does a lot of the heavy lifting, probably most of the heavy lifting to get these together. And she and I will sort of discuss, we'll have things on our list for a long time, and they won't, something more time sensitive will pop up, and so that it falls back down to the list. But we go over that list as we look forward to the next month, and then we just try to space out so that every committee is, now that this committee has met this month, probably it won't next month. We'll do the committees that haven't met in a couple months in December.
All right, well, probably January sometime, January, February for the next meeting.
You got it. Especially if Nina gets us the Greenway folks. We'll get them on stage as quickly as we can.
And if Marion wants to talk about the garden, we could give her an actual slot.
we've already got an agenda. We can just, you want to just carry on? We just carry on.
Yes. By the way, do you want to talk, does anybody want to talk about the garden? I know Marion, she had to leave for another meeting. No? Okay. Next time.
Yeah, for sure. Next time. Let's get that on.
I don't see any more hands raised, Donald, but if anyone is unable to raise their hand, feel free to unmute yourself and speak.
If not, that will be the end of the meeting. It was a nice long meeting. It's almost 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
We always try and end by at least 8.
Well done. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Good night.
On Donald, Anya.
Thank you, folks.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night, folks.